Frantz Fanon was born in 1925 on the French Caribbean island of Martinique. He grew up in a middle-class family in a society where the legacies of slavery and colonial rule still structured everyday life. His early education came under the guidance of Aimé Césaire, the poet, politician, and leading voice of the Négritude movement. That mentorship was transformative. It exposed Fanon to both the beauty of Black identity and the crushing weight of colonial hierarchies. Later, after fighting in World War II for the Free French forces, he went on to study medicine and psychiatry in France. But even in his academic life, Fanon confronted the sharp contradictions of a system that asked him to serve universal human needs while denying his own humanity. At just 18, Fanon joined the Free French forces to fight against Nazi occupation. He fought in Europe, was injured in battle, and received a Medal of Valor. Yet when the war ended, he returned to Martinique and later France, only to find himself treated as a second-class citizen because of his race. That deep contradiction, the sacrifice for freedom abroad, met with racism at home, sharpened his political consciousness. In fact, those experiences shaped the revolutionary thinker and the revolutionary actor he would become. Fanon wasn't just a name in a textbook. He lived at the intersection of medicine, politics, and liberation. As a psychiatrist in colonial Algeria, he saw how the violence of occupation invaded not just bodies, but minds. Patients came to him with symptoms that weren't only psychological, they were political. Colonialism, he argued, produced a kind of collective trauma. But Fanon didn't stop at diagnosis. He joined the Algerian liberation movement, putting his own life and career on the line. His writings became weapons, works that emerged directly from struggle, not from an ivory tower. And that's why even today his words still cut sharply. They weren't meant for quiet contemplation alone. They were calls to action. In Algeria, Fanon wasn't just theorizing about colonial trauma. He was treating it every day. At the Blida-Joinville Psychiatric Hospital, he noticed that both colonized patients and French settlers showed distinct patterns of mental illness directly tied to colonial violence. He pioneered new therapeutic approaches that broke with rigid, Eurocentric models. Eventually, he resigned, declaring that he could not, in good conscience, continue practicing psychiatry within an oppressive colonial system. That resignation letter itself reads like a manifesto. In November 1956, Dietrich Frantz Fanon officially resigned as chief psychiatrist at the Blida-Joinville Hospital in Algeria, a powerful act of protest against serving within a system he found morally untenable. In his letter addressed to the resident minister, Governor General of Algeria, he wrote, "For many months, my conscience has been the seat of unpardonable debates, and the conclusion is the determination not to despair of man, in other words, of myself. The decision I have reached is that I cannot continue to bear a responsibility at no matter what cost, on the false pretext that there is nothing else to be done." This line captures the ethical and existential rupture that marked his transition from colonial psychiatrist to revolutionary activist. In that moment, Fanon made clear that medicine could not be separated from politics. Treating patients inside a colonial system while ignoring the violence outside was an impossible contradiction. His resignation was a public act of defiance, and within months, he was expelled from Algeria. From that point on, Fanon would no longer serve as a doctor of individuals. He would become instead a doctor of nations, joining the Algerian National Liberation Front and devoting himself entirely to the struggle for freedom. A scathing mirror, black skin, white masks. Fanon's first major book, Black Skin, White Masks, was as much a personal reckoning as it was a political analysis. He unpacked how racism fractures identity, how colonial subjects are taught to wear the white mask of the colonizer in order to survive, while quietly despising the black skin underneath. He showed how that split corrodes self-worth and traps people in cycles of internalized oppression. And he didn't shy away from the question of violence. For Fanon, violence wasn't just what the colonizer inflicted, it was also potentially a way for the colonized to reclaim their humanity. That's not an easy or comfortable idea, but Fanon forced his readers to confront it head on. Fast forward to today, debates about assimilation, cultural erasure, and systemic racism still echo with Fanon's insights. His mirror reflects truths that remain painful but necessary to face. If black skin, white mass was diagnosis, then the wretched of the earth was prescription. Written as Algeria fought for independence, it laid out a psychological and political roadmap for true decolonization. Fanon argued that independence couldn't just mean swapping out the flag. It required rebuilding society, economics, culture, and consciousness itself. He warned, though, that new nations might stumble, that leaders could mimic colonial rulers, creating a national bourgeoisie that hoarded power while ordinary people remained poor. It was a chillingly accurate prediction for many post-colonial states. Movements around the world, sometimes faithfully, sometimes selectively, drew inspiration from Fanon. His words became a blueprint, but also a battlefield of interpretation. In 1958, Fanon attended the historic All-African Peoples Conference in Accra, Ghana, a gathering that brought together anti-colonial leaders, freedom fighters, and thinkers from across the continent. Standing before that assembly, Fanon delivered a speech that cut through rhetoric and went straight to the heart of the struggle. He reminded the audience that decolonization was not only about ejecting European powers, but about dismantling the psychological and economic chains they left behind. His words electrified the conference, giving voice to the urgency and depth of liberation. For many in attendance, Fanon's intervention pushed the conversation beyond politics into the realm of culture, identity, and consciousness. It was one of the moments that cemented him not just as a theorist of revolution, but as an active participant in shaping Africa's fight for freedom. After leaving the hospital, Fanon became the spokesperson for the Algerian National Liberation Front, AFLN. He worked across Africa, particularly in Tunisia, Mali, and Ghana, helping to build solidarity networks among liberation movements. His activism made him a target of French intelligence. He lived under constant threat, but that didn't stop him from traveling, organizing, and writing. So what about today? In the streets, the spirit of Fanon is alive. Movements like Black Lives Matter echo his insights into racial trauma and systemic injustice. His analysis helps us understand why institutions built on oppression cannot simply be reformed with surface-level change. In the digital age, his idea of decolonizing the mind takes on new urgency. Think about how algorithms reinforce bias, how cultural appropriation flattens identity, or how misinformation becomes a tool of control. Fanon helps us see these as part of the same struggle, a battle over who gets to define reality. And beyond the West, his call for solidarity among the oppressed continues to resonate. From climate justice movements to fights for economic sovereignty in the global South, Fanon's insistence that liberation is interconnected feels more relevant than ever. Fanon was diagnosed with leukemia in 1960, but even as his health declined, he raced to finish The Wretched of the Earth. Dictating parts of it from his hospital bed, he poured his last energy into completing the book. He died in 1961 at just 36 years old, and yet his short life left behind a body of work that continues to inspire generations. His funeral in Algeria, attended by comrades in the liberation struggle, symbolized how deeply his life was tied to the cause of freedom. Yet Fanon is often reduced, either glorified as a prophet of violence or dismissed as a relic of the 1960s. The truth is more complex. His work was always about human dignity, about imagining new ways of being free. Nowadays, his writings challenge us to keep asking, what does liberation mean today? How do we resist new forms of domination, political, economic, digital, cultural, without replicating the old? Fanon's legacy is not a static monument. It's an invitation to study, to question, and most importantly, to act. Fanon's ideas traveled far, informing the civil rights and Black power movements in the United States, the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, and later decolonial thought in Latin America, Asia, and the Caribbean. Leaders from Malcolm X to Steve Biko drew from his writings. Even today, activists cite him as a guide for understanding how systemic oppression operates and how it can be dismantled. Frantz Fanon lived only 36 years, but his words continue to breathe fire into movements for justice. His voice doesn't just echo from the past, it speaks directly to our present and to the future we're still struggling to build.